Well, I also welcome and thank you all for coming. This is the first time I've done a HSB forum talk, and it's delighted. I'm delighted to be here. So thank you all for inviting me. What we're going to talk about is the year before and the year since. The year before being the year before George died, and the year since he's dead. Actually, it's been a little more than a year, but the phrase was kind of catchy to remember. So the year before, really, we're going to start by looking at some of the essays that George wrote about living into dying. And he wrote every other week and told Spy. So we have a collection of 22 essays. And so we're going to look at a few of those and what was going on in his life and in our life together. And the second part is too soon. The second part, well, the first part is living into darkness and finding light. And we talked a lot about darkness and light. The second part is living into grieving and finding gratitude, which is what I'm still working on and probably will do for a long, long time. It is not a book at this point. Maybe a book someday. There are people who urged me to make it into a book, but I just found one of these old acrylic boards that I had, and I thought it just looks so cool. So I thought, one other thing I want to say is that whenever I've given some book talks before, my son always urged me to start out with an alert. I said, well, what's that? He said, you tell people what's going to happen. Well, what I start out with is a tear alert. This stuff is really hard. And so if I cry, you can cry with me. There are a couple of quotes that I found in all my brief reading. One is, if someone cries in front of me, I consider it a gift. The other is, it is a gift to others to trust them enough to share our feelings with them. And most of you, I know, a couple of people I've just met, but I do trust you. And so let me cry and you could cry with me. A little background on George. There he is. Some of you may remember that guy, although I don't remember that guy at all. He was born on Staten Island, New York. And tragically, his father died when George was, I think, 11, 12 years old. He was in World War II, and when he came home, he was really a changed man, and he committed suicide about 6 months after he came home. So a tragic family event, certainly. George was a terrible student. He was a dreamer. He would be sitting in class, and the teacher would say something, and he would kind of listen to her, and then he would sort of go off, in his own little tangents, and then maybe come back around. But he spent a lot of time in the principal's office with his mother being called in. And always promising that he would be better the next time. Well, he couldn't. He couldn't do it. He said, if he were in school today, he'd be diagnosed with ADHD or something, which they didn't know back then. So he had a terrible time. There was one day that he remembered so well. Mr. Rubin was the principal at PS 29. And he called him in one day, and George went in to see the principal, and his mother wasn't there, and that really kind of freaked him out. But the principal sat down and just said, let's just talk. And what's going on? And so George just sort of spilled it all. And at the end of spilling this all, Mr. Rubin said, what do you like to do? And he said, I like to take pictures. I found my father's camera, and I like to take pictures. And so Mr. Rubin said, I'm going to make you the school photographer. Wonderful. I mean, here was a guy who really listened to him and gave him some status and some meaning. And I don't know that it improved his grades a lot, but he did feel a little better about it. This is a picture that I found from his high school yearbook. Now, George used to brag about the fact that he failed all his courses in his senior year. But I found his report cards, and he didn't fail all the courses. He did not do well, but he didn't do well. But I love this. Undecided in his fate. What will possibly be his fate? So, I think they didn't know what to say about this poor guy. So he goes to Hobart College. He goes to Berkeley Divinity School. At Yale, he's ordained to the priesthood in 1960 in New York City. And from there, he goes to a church in Connecticut. And he was there for a couple of years as a vicar and assistant. Realized that church ministry was not where he belonged. And so he went back to New York City and went to the American Foundation of Religion and Psychiatry and took courses, 2-year courses, and learned to be a pastoral counselor. After that, he went back to the state of Connecticut and worked at a counseling center there, and also was head of alcohol and drug rehab in the state. In 1973, we can go to the next one. He was he was recruited to the, that skipped pretty far ahead, yeah. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. He was recruited to come to the Baltimore Pastoral Counseling Service in Baltimore. The Methodist Conference wanted to hire somebody who was outside their system, and he was an Episcopalian, because they were serving Methodist clergy and their families. When George got there, they expanded the service to include the community. Anybody comes for counseling, sliding fee scale, so everybody could afford it. And they also started a counseling and training program so that they could train clergy and lay people in how to be a counselor. So it was a really nice program. Okay. In 1988, he went on sabbatical, and we had done a lot of sailing, and so he wanted to come to the Eastern Shore and just take pictures, go back to one of his first love. He loved photography. So he spent about 6 months on the Eastern Shore taking pictures. He would come home on weekends to use the darkroom and develop pictures and stuff. But he just loved doing that. And this is exhibit, I don't remember when this one was, but he called it, what is it? A lot of the pictures that he took were things that we've all seen, but we have not seen it in this way. And he would find kind of weird stuff and just take pictures of it and then just say, like, what is it? So there he is.
Like super zoomed in? Are they real close up?
Can you zoom in on that?
No, I said, are they real close up? It
Well,
looks like
some of
maybe
them
his
are.
pictures.
Some of them are. By his, well, what we're looking at, his hand on this side is a whole bunch. He drove by a whole bunch of pipes that were lined up, and he looked down the center one to see what was there. The one by his other hand is just a whole bunch of rubber bands that he just threw down. Let's see, then there's some eggs up there. The one on the far corner, he went by an old house, and there was like tar paper on the outside of the house, and part of it was pulled away, and it looked like a little figure there. So there's a shape of a man or something, yeah, like a little man. But he loved doing that, and then he tried to figure out what it is. So writing begins. After he came back from sabbatical, we had bought a house, well, on the Eastern Shore while he was on sabbatical, because we figured that someday we'll want to retire here. So he came back from sabbatical, and we would come back and forth on weekends, and the milk was always souring in the other refrigerator. And we said, this is stupid. Why are we doing it? We want to be on the shore. So we left the counseling center and came here to the Eastern Shore to start a new counseling center. And we did that for a little while, and then stopped doing it. It took George a while to really figure out that he couldn't retire. He was unable to say the R word, but he finally figured out how to do that. And then he started to write. He took some writing classes. He always loved stories. He loved family stories. He told stories in pictures. And so now he started to write stories. And he took these classes in writing, and he discovered the genre called the personal essay, which was it just fit him. And he said, I could never read a novel, it's too long. Personal essays are short, pithy, and they really were who he was. We'll talk more about that later. So back at just one. So we put many of those stories together into a book, and The Bay of the Mother of God. I did bring a few copies of those. If you all haven't seen it, they're back there on the table. But he was excited. That book has his essays and photographs in it. So he was doing both. Okay, thank you. All right, so then COVID comes along, and we all remember fondly of that. The 6 feet apart thing drove me crazy. I'm a toucher, and it was so hard for me. It was also hard for him, and just being unable to go anywhere or do anything. It was tough. He continued to write. I was able to write for the Talbot Spy, and he also had a broadcast on Delmarva Public Radio on Friday mornings. Some of his essays that he'd written, he would read. So that kept him busy. In April of 2021, he had an annual physical scheduled. And, we all know that before you do that, you're going to get your blood work done. So he got his blood work done, and the doctor called about 2 hours later, which is not. And the roller coaster begins. The next day, we were in the hematologist's office for a bone marrow biopsy, which confirmed the diagnosis of acute myeloid leukemia. And within the week, we were at Johns Hopkins, and he started chemo. We were there for a week. We came home for a month, and then went back for a second biopsy to see whether or not the chemo was working. The doctors had told us, if the chemo works, you might have 6 months to a year to live. If it doesn't work, you might have weeks to months. Now, when we went back for the second biopsy, what they said was, it's working a little bit, but not as much as we hoped. So I'm thinking, this is in June, that we may not make it through the summer. The doctors said, whatever you need to do it now. And when a doctor tells you that, you know it's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, it's just like, whatever. So we're suddenly in a place that we've never been before. I want to read just a little bit of the excerpt from the prologue of the book, of these essays, because it really explains why the essays were written. Gazing out of the window, this is when he's at Hopkins, I was soon overtaken with a feeling of compassion for the people on the street milling about the hospital, seeking to be healed. An idea came to me. I felt strongly that I wanted to tell the story of how living with my imminent mortality was for my wife and me. I wanted to describe in detail the way we lived into my dying, day by day, the small and big things, the somber moments, the tears. I wanted to write of the terror, the feeling of helplessness. We wove in and out of each of these states as we faced the inevitable end of my life. Okay. Whoops. No, there should be one before that. There's that order. Yeah. Okay. He took some time off from his weekly spy essays because he didn't know what he was going to do, and then decided that he would go back and he would write not every week but every other week. He thought he would have the energy to do that. So he started writing again at the end of June. And this is one that he wrote in July. And this is the beginning of it, but I want to read a little bit more. I awoke from a pleasant dream the other day. In the dream, I was traveling on a ferry along with other passengers. The ferry was full. Passengers were all bound for the same place. No one aboard had any clear idea about just how its landscape looked. We knew it was up ahead on the horizon, but always just far enough away to be hidden. It is true for me that when I'm feeling close to others, sensing how deeply connected I am to them, the sting of fear and dread of danger is significantly diminished. In my experience, dreams are like whispers in a crowd, barely audible, but commanding more of my attention than shouts. He was beginning to dream.
So now, that one?
Yep.
Yeah.
I put this one in because touch was so important to me and to him, and we hadn't been able to touch. You know, his diagnosis came right as COVID was not ending, but the world was opening up. We didn't ever open up because his blood work was such that he was so we couldn't get near anybody to get infected. He would not be able to fight off any infections. So we stayed closed up. But being able to touch was so important. And as this says, a nurse's touch communicated to me a powerful sense of being cared for at times when illness and its treatment left me feeling disconnected, vulnerable, and useless. Whenever he went to the doctor's office or to the infusion center or to the hospital, the nurses were able to touch him, and that meant so much to him. Okay. I'm being invaded by an armada of 2022 calendars. Every year they show up in the mailbox around this time. The last thing that you want, if you have a diagnosis of death coming your way, is to get a calendar for the next year. And here are all these calendars coming in the mailbox. You're nodding your head, so you've got these calendars. So this essay really was, for me, a good example of the personal essay. It's like this little boy listening to his teacher, and then going off into tangents. So he gets all these calendars out of the mailbox. He's looking at these and thinking, this is the last thing I need. But where do I go with this? So he takes this. Do any of you remember the Family Circus cartoon, Little Billy?
Oh, yes.
And the dotted lines?
Oh,
Okay. Well, George was Little Billy with the dotted lines. So he starts out with the calendars, and then he's going all over these things about whatever this means. Well, what he ends up coming back to is this essay leads him to thinking about what's the meaning of life. Like, why am I here? And what do I have left to do in the time I have left? So it really is interesting how you start with a calendar, which is just throwing you off. And then you get back around to kind of a heavy kind of thing about what am I going to do the rest of my time, which I don't even know how much time I have. So here we go. The way it appears now, of the two of us, I will die first. I feel guilty about it. It's irrational. How can I be held responsible for something I have no control over? I can't quite find the words to express just how this scenario leaves me feeling. Sometimes I just weep because it's a heart matter. Tears are the language of the heart, and they don't explain things clearly. They really don't. They're important to shed. They are the language of their heart, but we don't always know exactly what they mean and what they're about. Sometimes they just happen. Other times you feel like you're in control of them, and then you burst into tears. But I love this image, and I love just the phrase, tears are the language of the heart. So we continued to treasure each last. We didn't know how many lasts we'd have, but we got through his birthday, which is in October. We got Thanksgiving, and I say got through because that's what it felt like. Our anniversary was in December. We got through Christmas. It was always wondering about when the second shoe would come. toward the end of December, the doctor told us that she would be discontinuing his chemotherapy treatments, which he had been doing, because they were no longer working. What they were trying to do was to kill off enough cancer cells that his other cells could work, and they weren't doing that anymore. The cancer cells were taking over. Thankfully, George would be able to continue to receive blood products. He would receive platelets and red blood cells at different times during the week, so that he could still be comfortable, but no more chemo. And that was the end of December. This one was written just a little bit after Christmas, which was our last Christmas. And he says, from my experience being told I have just so much time left devastated me, what I particularly call feeling desperately lonely. He had friends, he had me, he had people who could come to see us with masks and, sanitary, whatever, but he didn't have anybody to talk to who was going through what he was going through. So he had a friend who had been going through cancer stuff for a while, and he called him up and he said, can we have coffee? So he went over to visit his friend, and while they were sitting there, George said, do you pray? And if you pray, what do you pray for? And without a pause, his friend said, courage. And he was wearing one of those stretchy armbands, and he took it off. It says courage on it, and he tossed it across the room to George, and George looked at it, put it on his wrist. He never took it off. It was so important to him to have somebody that he could connect with, that he could talk with, that was going through what he was going through. And it really made a difference in how he felt about the whole thing. He had a traveler, a companion on his journey. All right, good grief. This essay was written about the time that my brother died. My brother had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in September. George had been diagnosed in April before. And so my brother and sister-in-law and George and I were kind of going on parallel tracks of, how you do it, how to chemo, all the stuff. My brother's doctor had said that he could not be cured, but he could keep him alive enough to do what he needed to do. My brother was an attorney, so he knew what he needed to do. We were told the same thing. The chemo and the blood products will keep you alive. Do it now. But my brother died, and so George writes about grief, and he says it's all about great griefs, little griefs, and good griefs. I found that there are times when I successfully avoid feeling the pain. I know it's there, reverberating through my heart. I'm afraid to give voice to it because I'll lose it. In cases like that, losing it is the best thing that can happen. After allowing myself to lose it, my heart settles down enough so that I can more easily embrace the pain. And that's what we tried to do, just embrace the pain. You go first. This was, essay was written about a story that happened many years ago. Remember, many years ago. George was what we call technically challenged. He did not like anything with the screen or wires or whatever. In the early 90s, he and I took a computer course. I loved it. It was like a new toy for me, and I just thought it was wonderful. George was absolutely didn't know. He said I should be sitting with a dunce cap in the corner. Gradually, he learned how to do it and how to type his stories because he needed to type them and send them off. Actually, what he did, he used an ink pen and a legal pad, and he wrote out all his stuff.
And you typed it for him?
No, I did not type that. I never took typing. I didn't type that for him. He would then look at what he'd written and then try to type it. Now, finally, he figured out he could push the little microphone button and he could speak it, but then you have to retype it because it doesn't type it. But he didn't do that. But there was one day, well, there were several times that, do you remember the screen that used to come up that said you created a fatal error?
Yeah.
I don't know if that screen ever comes up anymore, but it used to come up a lot. It used to come up a lot, yeah.
Semicircle.
Yeah.
It's not as upsetting as the skull.
And he would see the fatal error things and he would just freak out. So he had a lot of trouble with this. And frequently, well, whatever, the thing would come up, he would scream and yell and he would say, come fix this for me. And I would go and I'd try to fix things for him. This one particular day, remember many years ago, he had been working for a week or two on his essay and he got it all done and he was so pleased with it and he pushed the save button and it disappeared. I don't think he pushed the save button. I don't know what he pushed, but he thought he pushed it. Anyway, it disappeared. He was frantic. So he screamed and yelled at me. He said, oh. So I went over and sat down at the computer and said, hovering over me, go over there. Do not open. So he's over there and I'm frantic because he's worked so hard at this. So I'm working and working. I finally found it and it got back up. Said, I got it. So he came running over and I stood up and I gave him a big hug and I said, you have to die first. And he looked at me, he was absolutely stricken. And I said, no, wait a minute. You have to go first because if I go first, you are going to be a menace to yourself and society. It's just going to do you. So you have to die first. Well, we laughed about this. I mean, when I finally explained it, we laughed about it. He told the story to lots of other people. I think he told it to a lot of his all classes. You remember the story? It's not so funny now, you know. But he loved the story and he told it over and over again. And so when we find out he is going to die first, he writes about it. And I thought, really? I mean, you're going to make me look really bad. But it was interesting. It opens conversations in ways that you may not think you want to. But what this led to in the rest of this essay was one morning we're sitting there having coffee. We had our best conversations in the morning at breakfast. And so we're sitting there one morning and having coffee. And he looked across the room at me and he said, what? And I, long pause. I said to him, I don't want to lose you, but I want it to be over. Well, we both just burst into tears. It was something that I know we had both been thinking about, but nobody could say it out loud until he asked me what was going on. It was one of those moments that we needed to have, and it was beautiful. So what he says is we slowly opened into the pain and held the hurt to the light. We have been doing that off and on for a long time, but this is in early April. We found so many places in those many months of darkness that when we shed light on it, it became beautiful moments. So that's what this one's about. This was the last essay, and I cannot read it. It was published on Easter Day, and he died that night. He knew, I knew, we never said it out loud, but we both knew that this was the last one. And I wrote the epilogue to the book, and I talk a little bit more about that last week and what that was like and how we both kind of knew. And one of the things I said in there, and I absolutely believe, is that I think his writing kept him alive as much as the blood infusions did. He had a reason to be alive. He had a story to tell.
Yes.
And he needed to tell that story. So, what was this before time like for me? That was his before time. Okay. You need to know a little bit about me. This is my little bio. I was born in Kewanee, Illinois, which, as you see, is the hog capital of the world. There were more hogs shipped from my little town than anywhere else. They said in the United States, but we said in the world. When I talk about this to my granddaughters, they just love it. And I said, we had hog days at the mall, we had parades. Oh, Grandma Joe, were you the hog queen? I said, no. We did have a hog queen in the corner. No, I was never the hog queen. I mean, I played the band, I got the march, but I was not the hog queen. So there I am as a little person. And I love to say this without that. My father was a coke dealer.
Street corner?
So anyway, it's fun to say he had a coke distributing business in our little town. Both my parents were from Macon, Georgia, and when I graduated from high school, they moved back to Georgia. They had really wanted to be there for a long time, so they moved back. And I went to Emory University in Atlanta. My two brothers, one went to Georgia Tech and one went to the University of Georgia. I mean, you know, the first day on campus, you know, when you're walking in with all your stuff that you're taking to the freshman girls' dorm, around the entrance to the freshman girls' dorm are all the fraternity men standing there looking at the new meat. So this nice young man came and helped me carry all my stuff in the dorm, and I married him. He was a couple years ahead of me, so he graduated and he was from Baltimore. When he graduated, he went to University of Merrill Law School, downtown Baltimore. I graduated a couple years later, a year and a half later, and 3 days after I graduated, we got married. And let's see, what else? We got married and I moved to Baltimore and I taught the third grade for 3.5 years, putting him through law school. We had 2 children and we started house hunting for the perfect house, and which we found in February of '72. We put a contract on it and we were going to be moving into the house in May of '72. In April of '72, he discovered a melanoma on his chest. And back then, this is over 50 years ago, they did not know how to treat melanoma. I did not know the odds. He knew the odds. The odds were 5 to 95% that he would live. I would never know that. Let's see, they found the melanoma in April, beginning of May. He was in the hospital for surgery when he got, and I moved into our new house while he was in the hospital. I thought, it's a hopeful thing, we're gonna move into this new house. He spent the summer doing radiation and chemotherapy. He went back to work in the fall and he seemed fine until after Christmas, beginning of January, he had cold-like symptoms and started dragging a leg and went to the doctor, and the doctor said to him, the cancer has spread to the base of your spine and is in your brain. They tried a experimental drug, and the doctor came in and sat with me and said, if this drug doesn't work, he'll be dead by the end of the week. And he died 3 days later. We didn't have time to say goodbye. I thought he was going to be fine. He did not let me go to any of his doctor's appointments. He said, you have 2 little children, you need to stay home, you need to be the mom, I can take care of this. He went to all his doctor's appointments and everything by himself, and we never talked about it. I just knew he was going to be okay. So I was a single mom for 11 years. When he died, I had 2 and 4-year-olds. So I went back to teaching. I went back at the preschool level because I had all these little preschool people. I taught preschool for about 6 years, and then I thought, my mind is turning to mush. I need some adult conversation. So I went on a retreat and came back from the retreat with the knowledge that I really did need to change career. And a friend of mine was working at Baltimore Pastor Counseling Center. She was a layperson who had gone through the 2-year program. And I went over to see her and she said, why don't you do the 2-year program? You know, you don't have to be a counselor, but you can check it out, see. So I said, okay. So she gave me the phone number and I called later that afternoon and I talked to the woman who answered the phone, the administrator, happened to be the mother of one of the 3rd graders that I had taught. So I talked to her and telling her who I am, and I wish she knew who I was, but that I was interested in the program, that Shirley had told me about the program. And she said, well, we're interviewing for students for the program. Why don't you come in at 6 o'clock tonight? This is happening very fast. So I went in and interviewed and met George. He was the director of the counseling center.
Gotta believe it.
Well, it's a little like meeting Paul and carrying in my luggage. I mean, you know,
It's unbelievable.
anyway, so I did the 2-year program and then decided that I needed more credentialing than that. So I went back into the University of Maryland School of Social Work and got an MSW. But then worked at the counseling center. When we moved over here, when we figured out we couldn't go back and forth, George wanted to set up another counseling center here. So we did that for about a year. And I had said to him, you know, I'll do that for about a year, but I think I need to be doing other things too. So I saw clients for about a year and then I had a heart attack. And they couldn't find any reason for the heart attack. A friend of ours who was a psychiatrist came in to see me at the ICU and we were talking and he said, you know, there is such a thing as a broken heart. This is before everybody was talking about broken heart. And I burst into tears and I said, yeah, you know, I hadn't had a chance to grieve my first husband. My mother-in-law from my first marriage had died. The day we buried her, came home from the funeral, and I got a call that my mother had died. My last child went to college and we sold the house, the forever house that my first husband and I had bought and moved. I mean, it was just overwhelming losses. So I had a heart attack and I called my clients and said, I'm done, I'm referring you. And I sat and I looked at the water for 6 months. Then I started being the professional volunteer, Habitat for Humanity. I had done a lot of woodworking when I was on the Eastern Shore, on the Western Shore, and did that for a while. Then I got Lyme disease and my joints didn't work anymore. One day I was up on a ladder doing some hammering and my hand cramped up so badly I couldn't let go of the hammer. And I thought, I gotta stop all this. And so what am I going to do? I saw a little ad in the paper at the Star Democrat that says a class for beginning watercolor. I thought, oh, that would be such fun. So I took the class, and the guy that taught the class, after a couple of weeks, came up to me and he said, you know, you'd probably be pretty good at this if you learn how to draw. And I thought, I've told people that and they say, what a terrible thing for him to say, but it was a wonderful thing for him to say because I did. I then took drawing classes and I learned how to draw and I did all these other things and started doing this.
Yeah.
And I just loved it and it was such fun and it fit. So just being able to express myself through color was wonderful. I was married to this guy who was a black and white photographer. And as much as I appreciate that and admire what he did, I missed color. So I just started painting and I was doing my grandchildren. I was doing people's dogs. I was just having a wonderful, wonderful time. One of the things that came to me was that when I'm teaching, when I'm doing social work, there's no product. You meet with people and then they go on in your life and you don't know and there's nothing there. When you're painting or when I was doing woodwork, you have a product, you've got something you can look at and so this really connected for me in a way that I love doing those other things in my life, but this connected in a different way. So it was really helpful for me. when, there are a couple things you need to know about George. Do you all know Eeyore?
Yes.
The little donkey? Well, George,
George the donkey.
he was an Eeyore.
Yeah.
Such an Eeyore. I gave him a coffee mug one time, and on one side is Eeyore, and it says, "Good morning." And you turn it around, and the other side says, "I drowned it." We have Eeyores all over our house. For every occasion, I would buy another little Eeyore. We have one that talks, and you push his little paw, and he talks, and his ears flap. He said, "Ask me a question."
Joe, I have one of those.
So you know.
I love Winnie the Pooh. I'm actually wearing my Winnie the Pooh now.
Eeyore was our thing, and he was just an Eeyore. I think kind of the black and white photography did it too, you know, it was darkness and light. I think probably his father's death did it. I mean, there were lots of things, but he was a Eeyore, and he knew it. I mean, he didn't know who Eeyore was. I introduced him to Eeyore. So we have Eeyores all over. He would occasionally call me Mary Poppins, which I didn't mind because I think that's kind of a nice trade-off, a nice balance for Eeyore. But he was not in the holidays a whole lot. And I did a lot of reminding, particularly on Valentine's Day, which was kind of important to me. And so the next one, yes. He loves my watercolor and sketches. And so for every Valentine's Day, I would make a sketch. And this is one that I'd done in 2020, before COVID, before the diagnosis and whatever. But I just love doing these. They were just such fun. So what was I doing during COVID and during his illness while he was writing? Well, I was, COVID really prepared us in some ways for his illness because we knew how to shut down already. And we knew how to stay sterile and all that stuff. And what it didn't do though was, for me, give me an opportunity to express myself in the same way of all those other pictures. So I started pouring acrylic paint, which is very different. When you pour acrylics, you just add a pouring medium to the acrylics, and then you just pour it out on paper, and it does what it wants to do. For me, I was then in sync with the world, which was out of control. And it was really, really helpful for me to do that because you can manipulate it some and play with it, but the out of controlness was helpful for me. Now, George was over there writing, doing what he was doing, and he was controlling all his words. This is before diagnosis. He was writing other things, but I was doing this. And it was just really helpful for me. This one is called Swimming Upstream. I don't know whether you can see those little fish kind of doing their thing.
Oh, yes.
I Zoom with an art group once a week, and when I put this up, I don't know what one of you two said, it looks like fish, and then I added a few more little eyeballs in there. But I love this painting, and this is the kind of work that I was doing, and it's the other part for me was, and I don't know. A lot of times we do things and we don't know what we're doing, and when we look back at them, we figure out why we're doing that. Well, so I was doing a lot of pouring during COVID, but after his diagnosis, our world was really out of control, and so I kept pouring and doing these other things, and we'll see some more of that. But it occurred to me. I was adamant about driving George to all of his appointments. I did not put it together until later that Paul had not allowed me to go to any of his. I was adamant about driving George. And what I said to him was, your reflexes are not what they need to be. You shouldn't drive. And he sort of accepted that. He didn't question about why I was so adamant about it, but it was interesting. I did figure it out later. The other thing was that because it was COVID, I was not allowed to go into the doctor's offices. I sat in a car. I would go and he would go in with mask on and whatever. He'd have his blood work done. And then they would wait for the results of the blood work, and then he would come out to the car and ask they would tell him whether or not he needed to go and get blood the next day. We would go on Mondays for blood work. Often on Tuesdays, we would go and get either platelets or red blood. Then we go back on Thursdays for blood work, and then on Friday to see what he needed to get through the weekend. So I would sit in the car and I had my iPad with me, and I just love my portfolio. Do you all use my portfolio for medical stuff? I mean, they do the blood work and you get this little ding, and I look up and I could see what his blood work was like. And so I looked at it and I would see all these things, and he would get in the car and then he would say, we were going for more blood or whatever. Well, he would get in the car and I'd say, so how are things today? And he'd say, the nurses say things are good, but I have to go for blood tomorrow. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, not good. So we did this for a couple of months, and one day he gets in the car and I said, how are things? He said, well, the nurses say things are okay. And I look at him and he gives me one of those, what? And I said, I look at the blood work. Things are not good. He didn't want to know. And I had been protecting him the whole time because he didn't want to know. He was protecting me because he didn't want me to know. And I thought, this is a rerun. We're not doing this. It was really, really helpful. One of the things, we confront each other and we shine light on that darkness. It was amazing. It changed the trips back and forth. We understood more about the blood products and what he needed to do and how he needed to do that. And it was just, it was not a time to keep secrets. So we just made it happen. So this is some of the pouring that I did. And, again, you do stuff and then you look back on it later.
Yeah.
Puzzle pieces? Come on. I mean, I'm pouring and doing puzzles. I'm trying to put it all together. This one down here looks like sailboats. We'd ended sailing. We couldn't do that anymore. I don't know what that one on the upper right-hand side is. The other one is like a stained glass window. I mean, this guy's a priest, and this one in the middle, I remember doing it. I had held up a piece of paper this way, and I had just put a whole bunch of paint at the top and then sprayed it with water, and it was running down, and I put more paint and sprayed it with water. Then I put it down and looked at it. It's a sunset. I thought, really? I mean, but I didn't know that when I was doing it. But it really is okay to be out of control. Okay. All right, so I looked for other ways to get messy. George was being neat and doing all this thing. I just needed to get messy. So I started pouring paint, not just on paper, but on glass. And friends gave me all kinds of different glasses and shapes and whatever. And actually, we joked a lot that if there was any glass object in our house that was stationary for more than 5 minutes, I was going to grab it and take it over to my shop and pour paint on it. So just be aware that that's going to happen. So George is over there writing, and I'm just getting messy because messy seemed to be the thing. For years, we have been sending out a Christmas card and Christmas letter. That year, our Christmas card and Christmas letter was telling people about his diagnosis. There were still people who did not know. And so normally what we would do is one year he would do a photograph for our card, and one year I would do some kind of artwork. This year, he did not have any energy to do a photograph, and I wasn't feeling very Christmassy. This is not very Christmassy. I always think about Thanksgiving and fall. It's bittersweet, but that's what it was for us. It was a bittersweet time. It was the diagnosis. It was a gift of time to say goodbye. You know, a lot of people don't have the chance to say goodbye, but we were saying goodbye, and we were saying goodbye in our Christmas letter and in lots of different ways. I was also during this time just trying to make memories, trying to capture all of the lasts that we had. And we've been through, you know, all those other birthdays and whatever. But my brother's death in early February really hit me because we've been paralleling our journeys. And it hit me in the sense that time was limited, that we didn't know how much, but this is February and it's been since last April. So we knew time was limited. And a friend told me that you really didn't have to wait for any calendar date. You could do anything you wanted whenever you wanted. So I decided that I would celebrate Valentine's Day, and I started the beginning of, well, probably the first week in February, right after my brother died. And I put up this little shrine. I had poured some paint and done the heart, and I had little hearts and Hershey kisses all around and a candle. And we celebrated Valentine's Day for 2 or 3 weeks. It was really nice. He also, I told him, I said, listen, buddy, this is your last chance.
After all those
This
years.
is your last Valentine's Day. So, yeah. Well, he said, he ordered flowers, and he was really nice. So, yeah.
My mom used to get the Sears catalog and open it to the page that she wanted something.
Well, you gotta say what you want, you know? All right, so, the year since, let's stay with this for a minute.
Okay.
This, I was really thankful to have something to do after George died. He died on Easter Day. And we had talked a lot about turning his essays into a book. And he had asked that I illustrate the essays. And so that's what I did. And I spent about 6 months rereading them all and trying to find the little nuggets in them that I could draw pictures for. The other thing, for me, it was helpful because I felt like we'd been hiding at home for COVID for a year. I'd been hiding at home for a year of his illness, and I was afraid to go out. I needed to hide at home. So I had about 6 months of hiding at home and going over all his essays and doing this. And that was really helpful because there was no pressure to go out and do stuff. It was like I was in this little safe cave, and it was really nice. I could see the light out there, and I knew it was okay. Every now and then I'd venture out, but I would have to come back home. Knowing that about myself was very helpful because I didn't shame myself or guilt, whatever. I just knew that I was safe where I was. So that was really helpful. And having the book to work on gave me a reason to hide in my cave.
Kept you connected to him.
Well, I was connected to
He
him.
was still there for you. Because
Exactly. I kept it
You
with
could
me.
ease yourself.
Exactly, I
Very
did.
well said. You're very smart.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so the book comes out, and I love this quote. There's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. And I think that's part of his thinking. He had these stories he needed to get out, and he told the stories. What I said in this is we did it, I was afraid it was our last us thing, what you're saying, that I would lose you again. I'm just holding you in a new way. But it was exciting for the book to come out. That was Thanksgiving time. So I get through the holidays. So what was I going to do for the Christmas card that year? Well, what I went back to the Christmas card that I'd sent after my first husband's death. which I had found in a book of stuff. And I had looked through all this book of all these cards. And when I first saw this card, I thought, that's what I need to do, but do I have the courage to send that out? What will people think? But I decided that that's what I needed to do. So that was the card that I sent out. So when George died, I decided that I would do a similar card and update it. So that's both my guys. One of the other thing that I did around the holidays was change things around a little. And for Christmas, I decided our tree had always been over in a corner, and I decided that I would move it to a different part of the room. And I also changed the furniture around and stuff. But so I moved the tree from the corner over to here, and George hated tinsel. Now, I love tinsel. He thought it was messy and awful, but I like messy. So here I am, and I'm decorating the tree and crying and all this, and putting the tinsel on, and it was really good. What I didn't realize when I moved the tree to a different place was that I moved it right next to the hot air vent. So every time the furnace came on, the tinsel would do this, which was kind of pretty, but it also blew some of it off the tree. So I spent the whole Christmas up to Epiphany season picking up the tinsel from the floor, putting it back on. What I realized, and what I keep realizing is, since his death, I have learned to laugh at myself more. That the things that used to frustrate me, tinsel all over the floor, it's just funny. And I pick it up and I either put it back on the tree or to blow off again or to put it in the trash. It's really okay. It's just okay to do all this stuff and to laugh at myself. And it's kind of fun. I'm easier with myself for all of this. There is a balance for me on how to hold on and how to let go at the same time. Because as you're saying, when I was doing the book, I was holding on to him, but I can let him go and I can offer the book to other people. It's hard to do both, and sometimes I'm more on one side than the other, but I am learning to balance them and to give myself time. This doesn't have to be done today. Okay, so here we are now at New Year's Eve. I decided to do something different. The year before, we had done the traditional light the candle and have the champagne and watch the ball drop. My first year, New Year's Eve, I decided I just needed to be by myself. So I fixed myself, instead of champagne, a big eggnog, and I put a lot of bourbon. And then I just did cheese and crackers and dip, but I had the candle. And I found the Georgia football game. They were doing a playoff game that night. And so I'm watching the Georgia game, and it was so exciting. And it even went past midnight, so I missed the ball drop. It was really okay. I got through New Year's Eve, and it was all right. So now it's 2023. I made it through the holidays, and what's next? Well, I was looking around, and I happened to see in the Academy Art Museum the course offerings, and one of them was called the Expressive Journal, a 30-day challenge. And the object of this was to take an old book and look at and open it up and to paint or glue or write or whatever on the 2 pages that you open up about what's going on for you. And you're supposed to do this every day for 30 days. And it was a Zoom class, so I didn't have to leave home, didn't have to leave my cave. But I could go on once a week. We went on from like 5 to 6, and we would share the things that we'd done. That's where I met Ursula. We were in that class together. And it was interesting for me to be able to do that. I want to share a few things from that the morning after you died, I walked down the hallway and saw only one towel hanging in the bathroom. What we were asked to do is to just share ourselves. Now, in the beginning, my sense was that people were hesitant to do some of this stuff. But I decided that I'm not a journal writer, but this was an opportunity to put my heart out with art and with color, and it really worked for me. So I just started doing this, and here's another one. Grief does not change you, it reveals you. I found a lot of really good quotes that I liked. And then I did some of my own writing too. The hospice nurse took off your wedding ring and left it on the dresser. I saw it the next morning and tried it on every finger. The only one that fit on was my left hand with my ring. And I wore it there for a long time. And then I realized that George's wedding ring was a signet ring. And it was kind of scraping away at my diamond. So now I've got both hands going. There are a lot of people that say, how long do you wear your rings? When do you take them off? Is it 6 months, a year? I mean, they're still on, folks. They're going to be on for a while. I'm holding on to it. Yeah. So many good quotes. You start reading this stuff. Some days you can't do normal when your heart is broken. When I risk telling who I am, I give a gift to myself and to my friends. And there is such beauty in someone holding on to hope for us and with us until we are ready to feel it for ourselves again. Part of the adventure of my life is I don't know all that I may become, and I put in no yet. The grief process is hard. It is bittersweet, contains love and loss. Somebody was talking to me weeks ago and said, well, I'm just not going to love anybody because I don't want to lose anybody. But that's not the point. The point is that it is loss and it does hurt, but the love is just outweighs any of that. Grief is lasting. It's also not linear. You don't go from point A to B and get well. You go hopping around, and it doesn't go away. It does lessen and to make way for grateful, but it bounces back at unexpected times. And there's a lot more. You could add to this list for days. This picture of the sculpture up here just hit me. This is grief. It's the weight of grief. And it's a wire sculpture just filled with rocks, stones. And there's a heaviness about this that I just found was incredible. And so I put it in my journal. And then there's some other things that I'm cleaning out books again. I had asked George to go through all these books and just get rid of stuff, but he couldn't because each one is filled with memories. I found books from seminary when I was going through his stuff, which I could throw away, but he couldn't. And there's a whole lot of stuff like that I can't throw away, but other people can. I'm finding there's things that I can't throw away, so I'll give it to his children or my children, and they can throw it away. But I can't do it. But I couldn't do that. I finally got rid of a lot of books. Actually, I got rid of my encyclopedias that Goodwill or nobody will take. You can't recycle them. So I took them over into my shop and I ran the bindings through my table saw. It was just so therapeutic. And then I threw all the paper in the recycle center. But the fronts and the backs and the bindings, you couldn't. So, oh gosh, that was a book. I was destroying all this stuff. And it made a horrible mess, but it was good for me. I know this sounds strange, but I recently figured out that I don't miss you as much as I miss us. We did so much parallel play. When we worked in Baltimore, we worked together. We even did some groups and stuff together. When we moved over here, I had my life and he had his life. And when I would go to things where he was his life, I would be George's wife. I never had a name. I was George's wife. when he came to the things that I did, he introduced himself as Mr. Joe. So the parallel lives were really nice to us, and it's the us stuff that I miss. It's not George, it's the us. We had such good us times. When I saw this, I just had to do it. Friendship is knowing when and how to get help. And see that little bear says, "Are you okay?" And that little guy says, "I'm barely hanging on," and so he just walks away. And words are not always needed. You just need presence. You just need somebody there. And I just thought I couldn't draw it better than that. This quote just amazed me. "I will say to my friends when I cannot come out from my house in grief, put your hand in the open window and I will hold on for dear life." Which I says, that's an awful lot. Sometimes it's hard to find hope in grief. When hearts break open, they also break open. Hurt, sadness, loss, and pain tumble out, along with love, gratefulness, treasured memories, acceptance, and healing. I am so fortunate to have friends who help me to gently embrace these feelings. But I love the image of the heart healing. This is one of George's very favorite photographs, all-time favorite, and he used to tell the stories of when he took it. But this is another inference of, you go out with a camera. He was a film photographer, not the digital kind where you can see everything take. So he was out in Oxford walking around one day when he was on sabbatical, dreary day, he didn't feel well, and he stopped to just take some pictures of some fences along the way. Got home and he developed this, and he saw what he had taken, and he called it significant other. Oh. But he did not see that when he took it. It was after he developed it. I like these quotes. "The day goes by like a shadow o'er the heart, with sorrow where all was delight." That's Stephen Foster. "There is no shadow without sunlight behind it." Again, we talked about light and shadows, and he loved the idea of highlights in the shadows. Whenever he was developing his film, his pictures, it was important for him, whenever he had shadows, that they had highlights in them that you could really see. Do you all know about bed forms when you go to the beach? The mud and the sand along the edge of the beach, when the tide comes in and out, forms these little ridges, and they're called bed forms. And they transform depending on where the water's going and whatever. And I just, I feel like I'm in this transformation kind of thing. And I'm working on going from grief to grateful. Whenever I'm feeling really sad, I try to remember the things that I'm grateful for, and working toward that. So grief will not be lost, it will be transformed. Laura Oliver is the person who took George's spot on Sunday afternoons in the Talbot's Five. And when I first saw that she was going to do that, I didn't know whether I wanted to read it or not. But I love what she says. And when something good comes to an end, it takes a while for good to outweigh over. I've collected a lot of the things that she said and have written to her. And but this other story I found somewhere else, and I just love this. There's a story of a little girl who got home from visiting her friend later than her mother expected. Then her mother asked her the reason for the delay. The child said, "I was helping Jane, her doll broke." Mother asked, "Did you help her fix it?" And the child said, "No, I helped her cry." Sometimes we need people to help us cry. I don't particularly, because I cry all the time. But you can say nice things to me, I'll cry. You can say sad things to me, I'll cry. That's what I do. This is one of George's photographs. I think it was one in that other, what is it, thing. This is light reflected off something onto another wall. And it was just so cool. And we were sitting having breakfast and I looked over and the sunlight was hitting a metal plate that held the switch for the attic fan or something. And the light just bounced off that. And it only happens the first week in December and the first week in June, because that's the angle of the sun. But it was such a cool thing, and we just love that. But for me, it also talks about finding the light in the dark places for that year that we had together. This is another one of his photographs and two more of Laura's things. Time normalizes what is new to what is familiar. Turn loss into hope, and one day transform loss so thoroughly that we simply call it change. And then she says, with a dose of laughter and appeal for curiosity along the way. All right, those of you who've lost people have probably had this happen to you. You go someplace and you see your loved one. I was in Growls one day and I looked down the end of the aisle and there's a guy standing down the end of the aisle who's got on these faded red shorts and a white shirt and a pink hat. And I saw him from the back, but it really threw me. So I went home and found this picture of him wearing the exact same clothes. The other thing that throws us, the next slide.
Sorry, Coach Reed.
Memory, music does it too. You know, you can hear a song and you can remember where you were and so I had to put in the thing about music in our song. Continually, it's the little things that happen out. Now, seeing him is not a little thing, but it was just a couple months ago. I mean, George has been dead over a year, almost 2 years. I came home from the grocery store. We have a circular driveway.
Yeah.
And he usually would work in his office, which is the little guest house, which is around the circle. I would come in around the circle and he would see me come around and then he'd come out and help me carry the groceries. Well, I came around that one day and he wasn't there. I mean, this was just a few months ago. He wasn't there carrying my groceries. Suddenly, just so sad. But what happened, several days later, I came around and I was getting stuff out of the trunk, and here is a snapdragon blooming in the driveway. This is in January. I didn't even have any snapdragons last year. And here's a snapdragon blooming in the driveway. I can't explain that, but I love it. When I first saw this quote, I really was unnerved. I was supposed to spend the rest of my life with you, and then I realized that you spent the rest of your life with me.
Wow.
Yeah, powerful stuff. I have a very good friend who reminds me to just breathe. Okay. What do I hope you've gotten out of this presentation? By sharing my story, I hope that you will do it now. Whatever it is you need to do. Make plans. You need to do all these things.
Yes.
Say goodbye to friends and family. Do that intentionally. Don't let it go. Say whatever you need to say. And, your spouse, your whatever, may not die for years, but say what you need to say today. It's so important to talk and listen to each other. Every now and then George would do a what, and I would respond. I mean, yeah.
When you say goodbye to friends and family, I have had to remind myself that those moments when I think of a friend, Just pick up the phone and call.
Yes.
Because how many times do you look back, oh, wish I'd called her, or, I should have done that. And it doesn't take that long. Sometimes it's just a short conversation.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's long, and sometimes it's at the perfect time.
Well, and you don't know about the perfect time. I am aware that I'll be sitting there by myself and I'll get a text or I'll get a phone call just when I need it. And, it's like out of the blue. So yes, absolutely. I belong to a church group and we talk a lot about God nudging us. I think we need to listen to the nudges.
We're not always good at that.
No, we're not, because we don't believe in it or for whatever reason. I think there's a time, but I think if you,
after I finish this.
exactly,
We're always,
yeah. But the do it now thing, I think is really important. Share honest thoughts and feelings. That is not easy to do. And sometimes we don't even know what they are. We have to kind of dig around and figure them out. Sometimes, like my paintings and whatever, I figure out later. But work on it. I mean, it is not easy. Don't hide. Be open when it hurts. The morning that I said to George, I don't want to lose you, but I want it to be over, it was so hard. Find a way to open your heart to your hurts. Find a way that helps you heal. All of this stuff is what George and I did. It is not a prescription for the way for everybody to do it. Everybody's got to do it in their own way. And whatever works for you, what works for me may not work for you at all. So don't be afraid of hospice. So many people wait until the very, very last minute. We started talking to hospice in February, got on their lower level thing that we could still have blood products or whatever. A friend of mine is a retired hospice nurse, and what she said to me, and it makes so much sense, I will pass it on, is when you are the sole caregiver, that's all you can be. Hospice comes in, they are the caregivers. I could be the spouse. I could be his wife. I couldn't be his wife when I was just his caregiver. So that is, I think, a really important thing to know, that hospice can do the caring in their way.
Where hospice nurses, wonderful people.
Oh, yes.
Unbelievable.
Mhm. Yes. And the last thing is to share your story. I have this thing about, we can tell all the stories, or we can write all the stories, we can have the stories in our heads, but until we share them, the story's not complete. George wrote his stories and shared them. He put them out there. I'm sharing my story with you. Until we share it, it's not done. You're still carrying around a piece of it. So share your story. So, questions?
Thank you.
Comments?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for letting me be here and do this. It helps me to do it.
Yeah, you've given me an idea. A lot to think about.
We're not ignoring your Zoom people. You have any questions or comments?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Just, thank you, Joe, so much. I mean, it means a lot to have someone share such a personal story. And I just want to say one thing about George. When we had a meeting with you, we didn't really know either one of you all that well. And there were just the four of us, and he was very close to dying. And I found myself sitting there telling him this story, a horrible story of something that happened to me in my past. And I'm going on, and when I got home, I thought, good grief, this man is sitting there dying, and I'm telling him all of this stuff. He just, I mean, both of you are wonderful, but he just, I don't know, there was something about him that just drew that out, and I needed to do that, and it meant a lot to me. So I just wanted to pass that along.
Thank you. He loved hearing people's stories. He just loved that. That was one of the reasons he didn't want to do parish ministry. He didn't want to do all that administrative stuff. He wanted to sit with people and listen to their stories.
Well, George taught me how to tell my stories. I hope he hears me, because I've been doing a ministry. I'm a Benedictine oblate. And the ministry is to tell your story, and I do it where I live, which is the Acts community. But what I remember most of all, I took courses with George, and he knew about my son with multiple disabilities. And the beginning of the class always started with, Anne, tell your story. And immediately, people would start to open up. And it was one of the things that hospice used to do. There was an incredible group of people that we used to meet with. And we gained so much from that because we were able to talk about our stories. And so I'd like to end it with a smile, though. So I don't know how, I think it was Greg, our pastor at Trinity Cathedral. Come join us. It's been wonderful the last few years, it really has. But so someone told Greg and George that my son was in the hospital, and they weren't sure if he was going to live. So George and Greg come over to the hospital right here in Easton. They keep saying, yes, his name is Ben McCormick. And they keep saying, there's no one here by that name. I remember this. My husband and I have different last names. If you are getting married at any time, don't do it. Because we run into real problems. So the two of them start, now with security, they go to it. They're going up and down the stairs, walking down the halls, looking for his name, Ben McCormick. So I don't know how much longer after, it wasn't too long afterwards, he said, and he never got it straight. Nor Greg doesn't have it straight. So I said, Ben's last name is Jim's last name, Adams. Really? Anyway.
George was not a good student.
When I miss George, I think about that. He really taught me how to tell my story. And I've tried to write it, right, John? John's tried to help me. Did Barbara get that far? I saw there. Is that
You have a question?
It may be.
Microphone.
Oh. Yeah. It's
Make yourself. You're muted.
Yeah, my name is Bob Feldhune. You see on the screen, Barbara, my wife Barbara is over here. It's her computer. But I'd like to, number one, thank you, Joe, for what you've done. And and for the way the book is presented. You mentioned that they're a personal essay. They're written in the first person. And as I read the book, I had to think in terms of George, both as a friend and as a teacher. And as I read the book, I reflected upon both of us grew up in New York City. As you mentioned, George, on Staten Island. Myself, if you can't tell, in Brooklyn. And we would often commiserate about that. And both of us had a great joy of water. Both of us have homes in the St. Michael's area on Broad Creek. And I guess as I sort of read the book, I sort of felt that George was sitting there talking to me. And as I got to the chapter, when you were talking about decluttering the house, George mentioned in the book how difficult it was to go declutter the house and get rid of his Harris tweed coat. And I remember being with George at a memorial service. I think it might have been Myra Goldgeyer's, and I was wearing my Harris tweed coat. This was about 2 or 3 years ago. And George came up to me and said, "You know, I really like a Harris tweed coat." So that was the friendship part. Picking up where Ann just left off, I remember to this day not being very good with writing. And I remember George had this class back in around the 2000, mid 2000s, probably around the fall of 2006. Annabelle was in that class, I remember. And the idea was to write your memoirs. And George assigned us this book. The title of the book was A Year to Live. It's written by Stephen Young. And after we got a couple of weeks into the class, George apologized. He said, "I'm very sorry that I've assigned you this book because it was a lot about pain and suffering. But that was the book. As a matter of fact, I wanted to make sure for this course that that was the title. And I went on Amazon, and yes, it is A Year to Live. It was written by Stephen Young. But I remember it was painful going through that book. But number one, I would recommend listening to the 15-minute audio tape. It is a very informative discussion, and I think it's very complimentary to the book that George has put together, George and Joe. But one of the things that I remember in the book that I got out of it was an anecdote where a person goes to their physician, and the physician said to the person, "You know, I'm very sorry. Medical science doesn't have any way to treat you, and you have about 5 years to live. So what I want you to do is go back and consider what you might want to do differently." And person goes back, and some period later, the person goes again to the doctor, and the doctor says, "You know, we still don't have any way to ameliorate your problem, and I'd say that you have about a year to live. I want you to go home and think about what you're going to do differently." Another period of time goes by, and a person comes to the doctor and says, "I have bad news for you. You're going to die tomorrow. I want you to go home and ask yourself, what do you regret?" And George is in his book, as you said, Joe, he really had one regret, that he wasn't going to be there for you. Well, you know, you, as pointed out, you really can't control the end, so to speak. And so the time went by, and we finished the class, and George wanted people to, you know, think about the class and put things on paper. About, I don't know, it was the next spring or the next fall, George called us together. I know Annabelle was there. I think Barbara Reisert might have been there. Nancy Sandman was there. I don't know about Sheldon Goldgeyer. and I'm not sure about Joan Katz. But we were there, and George called us in, and I was happy to go there because after I had finished with with George's class, I was sitting in synagogue, and it was probably Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement, and came to excuse me, came to a place in the service that I said, as my mind was wandering, as you said, George's mind was wandering in class, I could well relate to that. And I came across a passage in the prayer book. And that's what I was able to bring to this little gathering that we had on the porch with George, and George liked it. So I'd like to read it. It's just a couple of sentences. And it was, "Let us treasure the time we have and resolve to use it well, counting each moment precious, a chance to apprehend some truth, experience some beauty, conquer some evil, relieve some suffering, love and be loved, achieve something of lasting worth." So, I know, and I have people that I could say that for me, that's an aspiration. As far as I recall, and as far as I knew George Merrill, he was able to check off all of those. So thank you, Joe. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Well, we're about ready to run out of time on the.
Yeah, this is
Good.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
I want to say that you're checking off an awful lot of that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very lucky.
Thanks for being with us.